My younger sister moved into an apartment with a small kitchen. She has limited countertop space, a good chunk of which is taken up by the microwave. So she asked for my help to build a butcher block island to utilize this empty space on the left that'll significantly increase the functionality of her kitchen. It'll have a shelf below to house the microwave, so it's still easy to use but also out of the way. This thing was actually pretty easy to build, so let me show you how I did it. I made a plan and chose building materials. For the butcher block top, I purchased a pre-made, unfinished 4-foot by 2-foot birchwood block. This may be considered cheating, but without a joiner and planer, there's no way I could make one as good. Then for the frame, I bought 5 1x3s that are 6 feet long and 2 8-foot long 2x2s for the legs. These are higher quality pine boards, which means that they're almost perfectly straight and don't have any imperfections like splits or knots. The first thing to do is chop down the butcher block to the right size. Since this is a smaller kitchen and there's specific limitations, I need to cut this down to 20 inches by 30 inches. I put a piece of tape over the cut line so that the circular saw didn't create any chip out. I was mostly concerned about chip out on the top, but didn't think about the sides. One corner did get a little bit on the exit of the cut, but I can sand most of it out. And I'll just make sure that this corner is hidden in the back. Now I need to build the frame. With all these boards already dimensionally correct, all I have to do is cut them to length and start assembling. I started with the 2x2 legs. The standard height for a countertop is 36 inches. This butcher block is 1.5 inches, so the legs need to be 34.5 inches long. Each leg will sit 1 inch from the edges and be connected with 1x3s. I knew how long the pieces should be, but measured just to make sure. The short sides are 15 inches long, and the long sides are 25 inches. I'll be adding a shelf closer to the ground, so I cut 4 of each length. They'll sit right up at the top of the legs like this. I figured the best and easiest way to attach these is with pocket holes, something I've only done a few times in the past, but have never done on this channel before. You can go back and check if you want, but this is the first project I've filmed that uses pocket holes, and a lot of them. I bought a Craig jig because I'd be doing 72 pocket holes in total. I followed the instructions for the jig and punched all the pocket holes for these 4 boards. I added glue before screwing them in, and placed them so they were centered on each leg. A few times I used clamps to hold them in the right spot while I drove in the screws. The frame is semi-connected, so I brought it down to see how it looks so far. Now I need to start on the shelf. Instead of holding the board in space, I used 2 pieces of model plywood to create a 3/8 inch spacer. This holds the board in the right spot to be centered on the leg. I should have used this method in the first round, but you live and learn. The top of the shelf is 12 inches from the floor. I brought it down to the floor again. It's actually really sturdy and doesn't wobble at all. I guess I should start using pocket holes more often. I put the butcher block on top, and it looks really good already. The last major construction step is to complete the shelf. I'm going to put slats that run the short distance, using pocket holes to make them at the same level with the existing pieces. The length of each board is 15 3/4 inches. Each board is 2.5 inches wide, so if I use 10 boards, they'll span the distance from leg to leg perfectly, with a small aesthetic gap on either side. The slats will be flush with the top, so I flipped it upside down for assembly. I clamped a board as a guide to hold the slats at the right height while I drove in the screws. As I worked my way down, I made sure that each board was closely pressed up to the previous one. For the last one, I just needed to cut out tiny notches so it fit into the space. In a perfect world, it would have fit without the notch, but there's always going to be small variations in the boards or the accuracy of my cuts. Nevertheless, when I flipped it back over, it looked really good. Alright, on to sanding. The main thing to sand is the shelf to smooth it out and make sure the edges are flush. The corners of all these boards are pretty sharp, so I softened them by hand sanding them with 320 grit sandpaper. My sister doesn't want any of the wood painted or stained, just left as natural as can be. So I sprayed the frame with 3 coats of semi-gloss polyurethane. This doesn't change much, but it does protect the wood from kitchen spills and makes it easier to clean. I've never finished a butcher block countertop before, so I took advantage of the fact that I have some cutoffs to test out techniques before applying it for real. I mimicked the sanding that I'll do on the real thing. Since I'm keeping it at its natural color, I'm using this mineral oil. I followed the directions on the bottle, and it looked pretty good. Though I did learn that this rag was not lint-free, so I switched to paper towels. The test was good, so it's time to move on to the main event. Off the rack, this butcher block is really smooth, but I sanded it myself just to ensure it's at a high enough grit. I started with 120 and moved up to 320 grit. I also really needed to sand the cut sides and soften any sharp corners. Even though I haven't done this before, it was relatively easy and it turned out well. I started with the bottom side. After making sure the surface was clean without any dust, I put a liberal amount of mineral oil on the wood and spread it around with a paper towel. I let it sit for 20 minutes and then wiped off the excess. Then I did the same thing again. After that sat for a few hours to cure, I flipped it over to do the top. Because this is the side that'll see all of the wear and tear, I was much more liberal with how much oil I spread on it. I also applied 4 coats, making sure I got plenty on the sides with each application. This is the cutting board oil I used, and the recommended next step to really protect it long term is to apply this conditioner. It goes on pretty much the same way. Apply it, spread it around, let it sit for 20 minutes, and wipe off the excess. Though with this conditioner, I buffed it in between each coat. I have a buffer, but up until this point, I've only used it for muscle recovery. It works great for sore muscles, but now it's actually a buffer. I applied 4 coats of the conditioner throughout the day and buffed each coat to get it to a nice sheen. The very last step is to connect the butcher block to the frame. I put down a clean sheet of paper on the workbench and placed the butcher block top down. For both the butcher block and the frame, I decided which side would be the front and placed it accordingly. I made sure that the legs were all placed 1 inch from each edge. To connect the 2 sections, I used small L brackets, 2 on each side. All the screws went in easily without having to pre-drill. And with that, this project is complete. I don't do fine woodworking projects very often, but it's nice to know that I'm capable of building nice things every once in a while. I really like how this thing turned out. So now, let's deliver it. I put felt pads on the bottom of each leg and moved it in place. Right away, it made a big improvement to our kitchen. The ground was a little wonky, so I put an extra felt pad on one leg to fix that. We moved the microwave down to its new home, and just like that, her available counter space was tripled, making this kitchen way more functional. She's pretty stoked to have this now, and said she feels like her kitchen is now complete. Okay, that's it for now. See ya. Ow. Ah. You want to help? No? All right. See ya. Thank you. You guys to go. Can you go? Can you go? Thank you. Goodbye. I'm gonna cut stuff.